This moment in our nation's history transcends a year. It's a moment that calls for us not just to think about months or quarters, but really decades or even centuries. We've seen 250 years of daring and striving and growing. That's what's brought us here. Hundreds of millions of people pouring their energy and their talent all here, all into this great American experiment of democracy, this great American engine of free enterprise. And it has formed the most exceptional country in history. The British political theorist Edmund Burke said that this is a contract, society is a contract between generations who have died, generations yet to be born, and generations that are here among the living. What does our generation owe the future? What is our role in that contract? How can we keep a promise made 250 years ago, not only for our children and grandchildren, but for the generations to come, generations we will never, ever know? Will we keep that promise? This is a year to ponder these really big questions. It's not just because we're at a milestone that calls for reflection. It's because this is a moment today where it feels that we need more vision. We are requiring vision. We're begging for a path to a brighter future. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a year for choosing. Not only is it America's 250th anniversary, but it's a year when these competing visions for America's economic future, they feel like they're coming to a head, right? Americans are seeking solutions to very real and very pressing economic challenges. Inflation remains stubbornly high, everything from groceries to utilities, things in their daily lives. It feels expensive. Household budgets are getting squeezed. The limited housing supply is pushing up prices. We're making homeownership affordable for too many or too few younger Americans. We hear all the time about health care, right? That affordability is hard, that access is hard. People worry about it. It isn't new, but we've had decades of partisan attempts to try to fix it that have not worked. And we are desperate for a bipartisan solution that could address the problem, that could address affordability, access, and innovation. And what about jobs? Do you go anywhere where someone isn't talking about jobs, or an employer isn't really concerned about where to find workers? Or a human isn't really worried, do I have the skills I need? Are there going to be opportunities that I need? And then you have the whole AI over it. We're optimistic about the long term, but there's a general sense of unease about the future of work. Now, to be clear, there is a lot to celebrate about our standard of living, and that has a lot to do with growth and a lot to do with free enterprise. But we'd be wrong to deny the frustration that so many Americans are feeling. And we'd be really wrong to ignore the implications of those feelings, because what we're seeing is voters who are really desperate for solutions, really thinking about these challenges, and a growing number of them are willing to consider alternatives to the status quo, willing to throw out capitalism and try something completely different. Now, it's not lost on me that the last time we were celebrating a big milestone in our country's history, America was in a similar mood. Who remembers 1976? My God, that makes me feel really old. There were like 4 people who remember 1976. Okay, I'm hopeful that some of you are too old that you no longer remember 1976. So I was in Englewood, Ohio. I told somebody it was a suburb of Dayton, and they were like, oh, we thought Dayton was the suburb. No, Dayton is a very big city in Ohio, I'll have you know. But I was in Englewood, Ohio, and I remember waving my little bicentennial flag as the parade came down the main street. But you know what else I remember about that main street? The gas lines. As a 9-year-old, you don't really know what malaise means, but you get the mood. And what we were looking at in 1976 as a country, 5.7% inflation and rising, 7.7% unemployment. You're looking at soaring energy costs, a ballooning regulatory state, stagnating productivity, shrinking cities, rising crime. And this is all living under the shadow of the Cold War, right? And these nuclear threats we were so aware of at the time. There was this rising fear that American dynamism might have peaked, might be passing. Now, many of those things didn't just happen. They were the direct results of choices made by our government officials. It was 40 years of New Deal policymaking in which both parties adopted wage controls, they adopted price controls, instituted massive new regulatory agencies. Anybody remember a 70% marginal top tax rate? And that's just a few of the really bad choices that were made. But, you know what's really cool? America is really good at getting better. And 50 years ago, the people in charge, and the people in charge are the voters, they decided that they had to make a choice. And they had to make a choice between free enterprise and an economy dominated by markets, or an economy that was directed by the government. And we know what happened. They chose free enterprise. They elected leaders, Republicans and Democrats alike, who could usher in a whole new era of growth, of innovation, investment, and it was fueled by low taxes, stable regulations, and robust trade. As a result, here is what a child born in 1976 has witnessed in their 50 years. A threefold increase in American GDP, a 40% rise in US median household income, an 87% decline in global extreme poverty, a US revolution that made us the world's top energy producer, the rise of the largest service and knowledge economy in the world, transformative technologies, the personal computer, the internet, smartphones, AI, unprecedented medical breakthroughs. We've seen gene editing and 3D bioprinting. Look, despite all of our challenges, and we all like to focus on them, we live in an era of abundance and advancement. Our capital markets remain the strongest in the world. Global talent comes here. They choose America. Household net worths are at record highs. Consumers have more choices, more conveniences, more leisure. Diseases have life-changing treatments, life-saving cures. But just like in 1976, we're at a hinge point today. We're at a time for choosing. Every American wants the same thing. We want to fix what's broken without breaking what's right. The question is how? So let's imagine a child born today. What will her life look like in 2076? Well, it depends on the decisions our nation makes and the path we all choose. So let's assume that we choose the path of economic growth fueled by free enterprise and the right policy decisions are made. We embrace AI. We lead the world in smartly regulating it. We rethink and retool education and workforce training for the future of work. We prioritize R&D investment so that we're continuously driving innovation. We support that innovation through a stable and predictable regulatory environment. We finally fix permitting so we can build houses, so that we can modernize physical and digital infrastructure. We stop the trial bar from undermining our entire justice system with frivolous lawsuits that drive up prices for American families. And we protect those hard-won permanent tax reforms that made the U.S. tax code competitive. We ensure the U.S. is a great place to do business. We remain open to the world, open to the global exchange of talent and goods and ideas and innovation. These are the core pro-growth policies the U.S. Chamber will advance this year and, of course, beyond. We'll continue working with this administration and Congress to achieve them because they are the fastest, surest way to sustainable 3% growth. And 3% growth is the fastest, surest way to raise living standards, and that's a goal we all share. These pro-growth policy choices begin to alleviate pressures and frustrations people feel right away. And they mean that the girl who's born today will enjoy the security, mobility, and opportunity Americans dream of when she's an adult. Here's what her future might hold. By 2076, her living standard and the living standard of all Americans has tripled. GDP per capita has risen from just over $69,000 today to $250,000. The average household's annual income is up from nearly $87,000 today to $382,000. A steady influx of tax revenue and efforts to right-size government through tech-enabled efficiency has stabilized the nation's finances, enabling long-term investment in R&D and infrastructure. The social safety net is sound. The U.S. maintains global leadership through strong relationships and commercial diplomacy. We're setting the standards for trade, for technology, for governance. The pace of innovation has accelerated. We're looking at breakthroughs in AI and quantum, in medical science, in space, in energy. And these advances, they're not just powering productivity, they have revolutionized daily life, disease eradication, personalized medicine, and all of the above, energy abundance, they're now the norm. As a result, life expectancy, quality of life have soared, giving this generation decades more of healthy, active living. A more mobile, opportunity-rich society has emerged where talent flows freely, barriers to advancement have eroded, geographic mobility is supported by a robust housing supply. Cities have been entirely rebuilt, designed for resilience and affordability, and connected by modern infrastructure that makes high-speed travel and digital connectivity seamless. For this child, choices that are unimaginable to us today. Careers in fields that take human creativity, enable them with AI efficiency, homes in vibrant new urban centers, and a life expectancy that stretches well beyond a century. The promise of 2076 is not just material wealth, but a society where innovation, opportunity, that's what defines the American experience. But I want to be really clear about something. This isn't utopia. This is growth. And the sooner we prioritize it and sustain it, the sooner people today will see their fortunes rise. We don't have to wait until 2076 to reap these benefits. Growth will not solve all of our problems, but we can't solve any of them without it. So let's consider the alternative path. Where does that take the child born today? I'll call it the path of managed decline. So let's imagine that those who claim capitalism is broken and bad, they're the ones in charge. Those who declare there is no problem too big, no concern too small, that the government shouldn't step in and solve it. And they're the ones calling the shots. What do they choose? They choose wealth redistribution over wealth creation. They crowd out innovation with regulation. They restrict the movement of goods and talent. They put government in charge of really basic business decisions. They let government decide who can own and run a business, how big that business can get. They let government decide if Americans can work, how they can work, where they can work. What does that mean for growth? One study compared socialist countries with non-socialist countries. The socialist countries underperformed 2 to 2.5 percentage points on growth. So, under managed decline, instead of 3% growth, we might have 0.5 percentage point of growth, or less. Here's how that changes life for today's child in 2076. Under 50 years of managed decline, the federal debt burden has crowded out private investment, leaving very little room for innovation or advancement. Entitlement programs are on the brink of insolvency. It's forcing painful cuts in the social safety net. Families are struggling as household wealth, it's low, the accumulation's low, the promise of upward mobility is fading. 0.5% growth means GDP per capita rises from $69,000 today to $72,000. Household income rises from nearly $87,000 to $112,000. But remember, this is over 50 years. That's no increase at all. That is a brutal reduction in the standard of living. Meanwhile, businesses have lost the AI race to China. We're ceding leadership in biotech and energy. The US economy, once the global engine of progress, now trails behind. America's dependent on foreign technology, foreign supply chain, foreign critical resources. Mobility declines as cities stagnate, fewer new homes are built, and infrastructure is crumbling under decades of deferred maintenance. The housing crisis, left unsolved, leaving millions of people out of that opportunity. To sustain an expanding government, taxes are rising sharply, funding more services but triggering a business and wealth exodus. Entrepreneurs and capital are fleeing to more competitive markets, deepening the cycle of decline. For this child, adulthood means navigating a world of limited choice. For this child, she's growing up, we've got careers that are constrained by slow growth, cities locked in time, a society where innovation feels like a relic in the past. Life expectancy gains have stalled. Quality of life improvements are modest. Under this grim scenario, the American dream, once synonymous with mobility and possibility, has narrowed to survival within a rigid system. It's a future where ambition is tempered by scarcity. Ladies and gentlemen, this is no choice at all. This is not the future the founders envisioned. This is not the promise we've made to our children. This is not upholding our contract with the next generation. So for those who may be thinking, this will never happen in America, people will never choose socialism. Well, the Overton window, it grows wider every day. And what people are willing to consider, what they're willing to think about, it's opening up. And you know, the thing about veering off course is frequently not just a sharp turn, right? It could be a series of small steps in the wrong direction. We've got to choose to stay on course. We've got to choose to stay on this path of growth and opportunity. Free enterprise is not a perfect system, but it's the best one we got. It's the best one that's ever been tried. And you know what's great? It's the best at getting better. It's the system that enables businesses to respond to people, to respond to problems. We need it to address the challenges we're facing today. And future generations will need it to address the challenges that they face. And every generation needs it to seize the opportunities not yet imagined. I believe this choice hinges on something really simple. You might be thinking that it's policy or public opinion, but it's much more essential than that. You know what I think it is? I think it's fear. So if the well-worn words of FDR just pop to mind, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, he was right. Fear is a powerful emotion. And when candidates or elected officials speak to people's fears and stoke people's fears, the wrong decisions are made. Choosing redistribution over growth, that's a fear-based choice. It's a zero-sum mentality. It leads to scarcity, not abundance. Government control over free market forces, that's a bet on bureaucracy, and it's a bet against people. Regulation over innovation, that's also a fear-based choice because it says, you know what, it's easier for me to imagine all the things that can go wrong, all the things I need to be protected from, than all the things that could go right. Protectionism over global engagement, that's a fear-based choice too. That's not strength, that's not self-interest, that's fear. And at our essence, us together, we're not a fearful nation. It's not in our DNA. But it's occurred before in history. And in those moments, we've demonstrated a remarkable capacity for renewal. We go back to our intrepid origins. We reflect on really remarkable innovations. And we remember who we are and what we're made of. Because America is the best at getting better. And I believe that this can be a moment where we all decide that it is time to start daring and striving and growing and improving again. So you may be wondering as I wrap up my address, if I'm ever going to wrap up my address, you may be wondering, what is the state of American business. I'll tell you what it must be. At this moment for choosing the state of American business, it must be fearless. Growth-oriented, yes. Market-driven, of course. Future-focused, absolutely. But above all, fearless. It is going to take courage and audacity to lead our nation. There are changes on the horizon. And whenever there are big shifts in history, right, there's short-term pain on the way to long-term gain. Government and business are going to have to work together to really support all Americans through this transition with a vigorously and consistently growing economy. We have to be fearless. Fearless like the early Americans who crossed oceans and crossed a continent to build lives and businesses and communities and industries from nothing. Like the inventors who weren't deterred by failure, never giving up, and ultimately gifting humanity with electricity, the printing press, the assembly line, the 3D printer. We have to be fearless like the farmers who gave up the horse and plow for combines driven by electricity, GPS enabled. My favorite. We have to be fearless like small businesses who risk every penny, borrow every possible dollar to bring an idea to life. Those who've dreamed and designed great cities, who've connected them with each other and with the world. The industries and companies that dared to put planes in the sky, rockets, satellites, and people in space. We put people in space. That's not a fearful country. We have people who've invented and then audaciously put every bit of human knowledge in a device that fits in your pocket. And they're continuing to push all the limits of science and technology. And we have to be fearless like the people who are going to create and imagine things we can't even think about today. We have to be fearless because it's our legacy and because it's our future. When you think about 250 years in history, it's a blink. And if you think about all that we have accomplished in that very short time, it's breathtaking. Some of the people who came to America 250 years ago in pursuit of individual economic, political freedom, they had nothing to lose, absolutely nothing. My great-great-great-grandfather came here as an 8-year-old. We don't even know who brought him. I'm positive that he had nothing to lose. Other people who ended up here fought for generations for those freedoms. But today, we have nothing to lose and vastly more to gain, vastly more to give that next generation, if we choose to. So imagine with me what the next 50 years might hold. And together, let's make it so, because we are not in the business of dreaming. We are in the business of doing. And the Chamber of Commerce of the United States will fearlessly do its part to strengthen our nation's future. It's up to us.